One of the most important elements for your longevity is the quality of your relationships. Today, we're going to be talking about how to build quality relationships with the people that you love. Specifically, we're breaking down how to restore and repair some of those relationships, maybe with family or close friends that have been strained, that have started to pull apart. And we're going to talk about that through the lens of our own family experience and share that fully with you. My name is Lindsey Pickowitz.
And I'm Brian Pickowitz.
And we're the head coaches and the co-founders at The Fitness Project, where we build fit and healthy leaders. Now, if you're hearing that, or maybe you've seen some of our content, you might be wondering, how does this relate to my health specifically, or my fitness, or my leadership? So I'll kick it to Brian for that one. So why are we talking about this?
The most important element of longevity is having a purpose to live longer. I think of my grandfather, who was diagnosed with a congenital heart condition in his 30s. Actually, one of the best conversations that came of this last weekend was hearing some more stories about how he worked through that as a young man. But he had 4 major heart attacks in his life, massive surgeries, was the bionic man by the time he was ready to pass. And the reason why he fought so hard was because he didn't want to leave my grandmother. That's one example of the human condition, but for all of us, right? Isolation leads to a decrease in mental health. It leads to depression. It leads to suicide. It leads to also poor health in general. So knowing that the quality of our life is a reflection of the quality of our relationships, and being able to zoom out and say, well, what is my base of relationships like, right? How am I doing with my family? Are there any messes I need to clean up? Is there resentment that I'm holding on to? Am I truly in a loving state even though it's hard? Mm-hmm. That's what we want to talk about, because in our lives, that's been something that we've had to walk the journey of in our own ways. And recently, this last week, Lindsey and I celebrated the 1-year anniversary of being back in our home state of New Hampshire, where we grew up, surrounded by family, surrounded by friends. And what we decided to do is invite 12 to 15 of our closest relatives, Lindsey's parents, my brother, his wife, his daughter, my niece, all these people into one house on the lake. And we all stayed together for 3 days. And it was our gift to them for this one opportunity together. It's like, hey, when I was growing up as a kid, that was something that we always did. It's been about 15 years or so since we did something like that. I wanted to start that tradition for our family as you and I built our lives together. And we had this beautiful experience where everyone came together, and it was just so peaceful. It was so loving. But we want to backtrack what got us there.
Yeah.
Right? And be able to actually showcase maybe how some of the tumultuous ties in the relationship were mended over the last 7 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. And then also reflect on just some of the lessons from this beautiful experience, because there might be something to tease out when it comes to your health, repairing some relationships for yourself, or just meet you in your own journey as well.
Yeah. And a lot of the clients that we work with, they love their family, but they really struggle to be present with them because they're just under so much pressure and so much stress, and that stress has created strain in maybe their marriage or other relationships. So hopefully if you're in that position, you'll get a lot from this too. Doesn't mean that you have to be in tumultuous relationships to gain a lot from this. But if you did, kind of zooming out to your point of the whole journey, just over a year ago, we posted a video on YouTube. I think it was one of our first ones, about the hardest decision we've ever had to make, because we went basically, once we graduated college, we had this big move planned to get out of New Hampshire to go chase adventure, chase the dream, and we moved straight to LA. Furthest place we could go other than Hawaii, that's in the United States, from where we grew up in New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. And I know we both have our our own reasons why we wanted to do that. We weren't married at that point. We had just been dating for a couple years, and we just said, hey, we're going to go do this. But for me, it was pretty much right when I had started to develop a better relationship with my parents. And after having a very challenging dynamic with them through my teenage years, it was an interesting time to leave because I still felt called, like I wanted to get out of there. I wasn't planning to live in New Hampshire ever again. And it was really fascinating how this turn of events happened that brought us back to New Hampshire. But when it comes to that whole story about moving, I feel like your approach to it and what you wanted, I think is probably the better place to start.
Well, I grew up and I had a really great family dynamic. Both my parents were loving. My dad worked really hard, and for much of my childhood was able to provide my family the opportunity for my mom to be a stay-at-home mom. Now, this is in the 90s, a little bit easier than it is now. But then when I got to about 10 or 11, he got really sick, and he developed MS, and so he could no longer work as a carpenter. He was a finished carpenter. And that put a lot of strain on our family. So that put stress in the household. There was a lot of challenges with me in the household. That kind of compounded. My mom had to be the breadwinner. My dad went through his own mental health challenges. And I remember getting to 18 and also seeing that the people that I was surrounding myself with, not just my family, but my friends, the people that I had been spending all my time with, did not have my best interest at heart. And the community, although it had a lot of positive, there was also a lot of negative. And I just wanted to break out. I had to get out of there. During that time, my dad's MS got more intense. My mom started to experience some health challenges. And I was isolated because I didn't feel like I really belonged anywhere. I didn't feel like people understood me. People would talk about me opening up a personal training studio in Franklin, where we grew up. And I would always say, that's not where I'm going to be. I'm going to be very far away from here. Mm-hmm. My goal was to move to Los Angeles, to become a professional bodybuilder, and to be successful in business. Mm-hmm. So seeing not only that my family ties started to sever, which caused a lot of resentment, because there was also a lot of people, not just in my family, but people in my life who were abusing drugs, who were abusing alcohol, who weren't taking care of themselves. And as someone who really was taking care of themselves, I didn't know how to help them, and that created a lot of resentment and anger, because I almost, now looking back, felt that it was going to cause me to have to stay home. And when that happens,
or become a caretaker in some way.
Yeah, and I just rejected that completely, and so I became angry that that was being put on me. My brother would say, because of Dad's MS, like, I feel like, we are never going to have an opportunity to get out of this. And I said, that's not my life. So I'm getting out of here. I remember even the day I told my parents, I'm like, I'm moving out next week. I'm gone. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of compounded from there. So there was this strain on the relationship once we moved. I still had a lot of love for my family. And when we moved to Los Angeles, my grandfather had a stroke. Mm-hmm. My brother had a massive car accident that really messed him up as soon as we left. So it was about a week before we left. He got in a head-on collision. A motorcycle hit him, and the biker passed away. That caused severe mental health challenges for him. He got very depressed. And so being away in LA, I felt like I couldn't be there for my family. That was kind of challenging. Yep. But we traveled home, and we came back for 3 weeks. And we would do that. We brought John out to LA. We brought my parents out to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. But the hard thing was, over that time, every time you'd see your parents or you'd see your grandparents, I was so consumed with building the business that I would just dip in and dip out. I was never fully present. Mm-hmm. And I realized that after my grandfather passed away in 2020, because it was the beginning of the pandemic, mm-hmm. and even though I would always come and visit when I was in town, I would see him, I would tell him I loved him. I would call him and talk about the Beatles. Like, these were things I was doing. I realized that ever since I left, so for almost 4 years, so 3 years at that point, I would show up for 2 hours, or I would go in and meet them and have lunch somewhere, but I didn't really get, it was maintaining the relationship versus building it.
Yeah.
Maintaining the friend.
Showing up and then leaving so
Yep.
that you could say you showed up.
Yep. So I didn't say I wasn't showing up.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a deep relationship.
For sure.
And then when we came back, we couldn't bury him until June. So this is during the pandemic. And then what the best thing that happened was during the pandemic, that was the first time we came home and I didn't have to meet with a bunch of people, because all of our clients were online, but because we weren't running ads or anything, everyone was from New Hampshire. So when we came home, we would always meet up with clients. So I was always focused on something else. I was always focused on more on the business, on more on my goals than I was on my family. And when we came home in 2020, it was the first time that you and I actually had to fully be present, because you couldn't go see everyone because of COVID. So we just spent the whole time with our family. I remember spending time with my parents and just really appreciating those relationships again. And then we came home for Thanksgiving, and again, isolation, because you can't see everyone. And that became kind of the pattern. I remember we went for January 1st, New Year's Eve. That year, we went to my parents because we were isolated. So we started building those relationships again. And then as that happened, I started to notice that my parents were not getting healthier.
Yeah, I think that's an important note, because I was kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum through this.
Yeah.
Because for me, again, through teenage years, I developed a lot of anger and even hatred towards my parents that just seemed like it couldn't be resolved. And that's why I just wanted to leave and go as far away as possible. But what was great is that once we did go, I went through college, I got myself healthier. That was really important, because I didn't like myself. It wasn't that I didn't like them. But as I went through college and I started to get healthy, I started to reach out to them and start to repair that relationship and became more loving. And then, like I said, right as I started to get more confident and comfortable with my relationship with my parents, I moved. And once I moved, I don't remember why, because I was very focused on myself too, as you are at 22, which is fine. But once we got out there, I just realized how important it was to just keep conversation lines open, because I had just started rebuilding with them. I loved them. I appreciated them. I had resolved any hatred or pain that was in the past and forgiven them and myself. So I made a decision to keep the open communication line. So I made it a point to, I think I actually put in my calendar like every month to make sure I called my dad, or make sure I had like a Sunday coffee date over Zoom. Not Zoom, FaceTime.
Still shows up on our calendar.
It does. On our Slack channel, it still says coffee with mama every, I don't know how to turn it off, so I would just leave it. But I made that a really intentional point while we were in LA, and then when we moved to Texas too. But once we moved to Texas, I mean, what was awesome was my parents started to become more and more healthy. Like, they both chose to start taking care of themselves. And as they started taking care of themselves, and maybe it was, I know they have their own life and they were having their own growth in their marriage, but they both started to become more open, because they were both very black and white, very closed-minded, I would say, lightly. And that tended to cause difficulty with building the relationship with them and deepening the relationship. But they started to become more open-minded. They started to get healthier. Like, my mom worked with one of the coaches at the fitness project, Caitlin, for a couple years, and I watched them get better. But your parents, I think every time that we came back, we were like, ooh, this isn't really getting better.
Yeah, well, that was really challenging, and seeing some of those habits that were underlying maybe younger in my life continue to grow was really challenging. And then also hearing about how, like, my dad went blind, not permanently, but his sight kept coming in and out. And so that was one factor. One thing that also was happening during that time is your family is originally from Texas.
Hmm.
So your mom was coming and visiting us in Texas.
That's true.
So you were spending more time with your mom there. You were seeing some of your family, some of your relatives. My brother got married. And so we
Hmm.
came home for that, and that was a big celebration. We went and visited my aunt and uncle who lived in Texas, and we spent more time with them. And he was my great uncle, great aunt, my Uncle Fred, who
Yeah.
was with us this weekend, but he started to talk to me more about life, and I got
Mm.
some wisdom, right? Because a lot of the people in my ear, the people that I was admiring, were people who rejected going back home,
Hmm.
and they isolated,
True.
and they stayed away, and that's what made them so successful. And I make not a criticism, but
It's a very good
that's
point.
not the message I started to get, which is, family's really important. You're going to want to be there for your folks when they need you. One of my best friends was the caretaker for his mom and dad when they were getting ready to pass away. His dad had a ALS. His mom had stage 4 cancer. She passed away. We watched him deal with that, and then we were also in their wedding. So there's just like these big life events,
Yeah, that kind
and
of
it's the coming of
re-establish that.
age. It's really the
Hmm.
coming of age. It's becoming a man. It's becoming
Hmm.
a woman. Like it's growing up,
Hmm.
and then compounding that, my brother gets married. Your aunt passes away, and then that starts to exacerbate this feeling and desire. Like, hey, I want to
Yeah, let's make the
be
most of
home
this.
for this time,
Hmm.
and it really came to a head about a year and a half ago, a little more than 2 years now, almost now. My brother had his first baby,
Hmm.
right? And I came home, and it's like there's just things that you're missing, right?
Yeah.
And you're only going to get a few opportunities here. And what are the other opportunities you're going to miss? And so the question that we asked was, well, or for me, it was like, when you're 90, what are the things you're going to want to remember?
Hmm.
What are the things you're going to want?
Yep.
And what will you regret? And for me, it was, I would regret not being home and having those experiences with my family.
Hmm.
I can make as much money as I want anywhere.
Yep.
And maybe there's a cap of that based off of where you're living. That is true, right? The biggest predictor of someone's income is their zip code. That's a fact.
Hmm.
So yeah,
I
where you
never heard
live, yeah, makes sense because the economics of an area, right?
that.
Economics of any zone. However, that's not my value. That's not the most important thing. So now we've spent a year home,
Yeah. Hmm.
and we've really been intentional about spending time and building relationships. And there's been this experience over the last year of spending time with family. The depth of, hey, we're going to come over and we don't have to do anything. We're just going to hang out. We're going to spend time. We're going to talk. We're going to have dinner.
Hmm.
We're going to do these things as a family. We're going to go play pickleball as a family. We're going to all visit
Hmm.
for dinner. These little things have allowed us to actually start to build the family that we want and kind of
Hmm.
rekindle that relationship. There's been a lot of conversations in between there
Yeah.
that have required vulnerability, that have required forgiveness,
Hmm.
that have required understanding and compassion,
Compassion. Hmm.
acceptance. And it's one of, I think, the most helpful things that I would give people who might not be able to do that or might not be having that experience is the understanding that, and someone else said this weekend, but your parents are human, and
Hmm.
all their mistakes were most likely them just not knowing what to do
Yeah.
and them not being perfect. And there's this quote that, remember, your parents, the first time your parents got to be parents is when they were parenting you.
Right.
So all the things that are there, if you can approach someone with a sense of compassion and love
Hmm.
and express to them that you want love in return, you actually open yourself up.
Yep.
And now the fear of opening yourself up is it gets rejected, which is why it's important to have a partner that loves you, because then they walk that journey with you, right? And they're there for you regardless, which is, I think, the beauty of our relationship, is we've been together the whole time. And so every challenging experience, every wound that gets hit
Hmm.
is able to be repaired by having someone that loves you. but I would say that the base of this whole journey has been curiosity, understanding, acceptance, and love.
Mm-hmm.
And then forgiveness, forgiving yourself for whatever mistakes you actually made, which is really important for me because I was an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
I was such an asshole. And I was like, if I would have been this way, maybe these things would have changed this way. And it's so much pain and so much judgment and so much self-criticism. And then being able to say, I forgive myself for that too.
Yeah.
And you can't get to the other side because a lot of your resentment and anger that you bring to a situation is also the unresolved frustration and anger that you're carrying from years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it's based off of how you feel about yourself.
Yeah, I think that the most beautiful transformation I've witnessed in you is your ability to love unconditionally and to genuinely say, I will love you no matter what. Whether or not you change your behavior, whether or not anything transpires from here, I will love you just as you are. For your family specifically, I think has been really, really beautiful.
I read a great book called Being Mortal
Mm-hmm.
that
That's a
someone
good one.
gave me. Lori DePaiva, one of my former clients. I talked to her about what I was going through at the time, and she recommended this book. And it's written from, I can't remember who the writer is, but the author talked about his experience of while his parents were getting close to death. And I don't know if he was,
Atul Gawande.
and I don't know, I'm pretty sure he was a physician himself.
Sounds right.
And so he talked about his experience as a physician
Mm-hmm.
and how America handles mortality. We don't handle mortality very well. And so one of the best parts of the book is choosing quality of life over extension of life.
Mm.
And that's one of the things he talks about because he would have patients or see patients or talk to doctors. I can't remember the context of the book because it's been a while, but the gist of it was there's people who would have terminal cancer who would fight and fight and fight and fight to extend their life. And the years that they got through that extension were horrible.
Yeah.
Versus the alternative, which might have been reducing pain, reducing the downside as much as you could, but trying to have the ability for you to live your life as long as you could.
Yeah.
And I share that because I think that reading that and listening to that, and there's a few other things. Like I started getting into Stoicism. I read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and it's just a big book about death and confronting it,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that your time here is short.
Yeah.
And I think that that's scary, and that can be challenging. But you look through the lens of, well, this moment, these people, we're only here for so long.
Well, it helps you establish what's actually valuable to you.
Yeah.
When you face death. If you don't, you just live your life in fear, I think.
There was another conversation that we had. It was with Lori McGuire. Man, I will be mindful because I want to respect her privacy, but it was something along the lines of a hard conversation she had with her mom towards the end of her mom's life, and she's like, I really wish I was listening versus what she was saying. And I think that those were really intentional questions we were asking ourselves along the lines. And now being here for a year, it seems very obvious that we're here. And we've grown so much. I mean, the things that we're doing, the way that we're showing up, the opportunities that we're creating, and just the skill set. I think that we've just blossomed in so many different ways. And I don't think that I would have been able to do that staying where we were because I always felt like I was in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And now when there's a hard day, when there's a, struggle, family's there.
Yeah.
And there's people around.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was just like you and I slugging it out. And that was hard.
Mm-hmm.
So then now to have these relationships and to have people, it's like, things are okay. You're going to keep growing. You're going to keep getting better.
Yeah. And what I gather and maybe would tie down and interpret from your story is the sense of stability and love and just the foundation that is set when you release people. Like you release them from your anger or your bitterness. Like you release yourself, but it's the key is that the what's on the other side of that, because it's so hard to forgive people, especially when they haven't said sorry, right? But what's on the other side of that is true love and freedom and stability. That I think it just sounds to me like you released a lot of bandwidth, like, and you were able to allocate that bandwidth elsewhere. But your greatest fear was that moving back here was going to take up so much bandwidth and you were going to have to do all of these things and you weren't going to be with people who energize you. And it's like the opposite has been true. There's still things you miss about living in the city and being around those other people that you met there, but there's a gift on the other side. And for me, it's a different experience because I started to feel this like call to or duty to be the one who unites family, to be that connector between the Rago household, the Pickowitz household, and just creating a beautiful new family dynamic. And I started to feel that probably 6 months before we even talked about making the decision. It was just this craving to be someone for them.
Yeah, and Lindsay started telling me we're moving home.
I did.
We're moving home.
And there were logical reasons like, oh my gosh, we're going to have kids soon. We're going to get married soon. All of these things, like I want to be around my family. So there's all those emotional and logical pieces that came up. But it was more looking back, it felt like a calling. Like you need to go. You need to be that person. And what's been great living here for the last year, other than really truly blossoming as my own self and then those relationships blossoming, is that I've been able to build relationships that kind of didn't exist before too, not just deep in the ones that existed. Like my brother has been so involved in my life, my older brother, and that has been such a gift. Like, cause he was more quiet growing up. I was very like loud and intense and I just kind of did my own thing.
Still kind of is.
And I didn't really have much of that deep connection with him that I had always wanted with my brother. So coming home, he's actually been living with us and we've created a really great family dynamic there. It's short term for the next like year, but that's been a gift that I could have lived my whole life without ever having like really a relationship with him. So that's been a huge blessing. Mm-hmm. And then going into this weekend, being able to see the calling materialize, seeing those 15 people come together and not feel awkward. Like everyone connected with each other and laughed together and just created a beautiful memory together. That was like the icing on the cake of like, or maybe not icing on the cake. I don't know what the term would be for the proof, right? Like it's the proof that calling has been actualized and it was real.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's, what it actually is the continuation of a process that you have been intentionally putting together.
Yeah.
When we came back from COVID, we would get our families together, right? Or
That's
during
true.
COVID, we'd get, hey, let's get dinner together.
Like a holiday.
Or
too.
we'd invite my parents over to play guitar with your aunt.
True.
You know, there was these little steps. We did Thanksgiving. So we started building the friendships together with our family. And then this was a bigger experience.
So what did you learn?
So that we had this house on the lake, and it was fantastic. It was beautiful. The appreciation for people. The appreciation for people. I don't think that we really appreciate people at times. Like we take relationships for granted. We take people's presence for granted. It's just the appreciation that you were here and you showed up and you did this thing, and appreciating the experience of someone versus feeling like I have to say something. There's this great moment where my Uncle Fred, who in my season of life is kind of like my grandfather. He's, both my grandparents have passed. My grandmother's still alive, but my Uncle Fred, so he's 75.
He's technically your great uncle, right?
He's my great uncle, yes. So he's my grandmother's sister's husband.
Yeah.
Okay. But he's been there my whole life, right? Since I was a little kid, I remember his jokes. He's always been around. And there was this moment where me and my dad and him were sitting by the fire. And I was like, hey, what music do you like? And he's like, oh, I like Robert Earl Keen.
R.E.K.
Like, hey, I like Robert Earl Keen. He said, play the song. So I played the song, and he just stood there and just, like, listened to it. And my dad's like, I thought you were leaving. He's like, I'm listening to Robert Earl Keen. Like, he's got a really southern accent. And there was just this appreciation of that whole moment, right? Appreciating the moment. Yeah. One of the best parts of the trip was my grandmother, who is the caregiver for everyone in our family. We were playing Mad Libs. So instead of everyone having their phone, everyone was pretty much technology free.
Yep.
For the whole weekend. Yeah, the TV was on. We all kind of watched a game once or twice, a football game. We were pretty technology free. And we're doing Mad Libs, and my grandmother, who's this really like serious lady, she just started giggling as she read Mad Libs and was just dying laughing. She's like, oh my God, I gotta pee myself. Like, just dying. And just to see someone who you care about, who finally got the opportunity to just relax.
Be a
kid and feel a sense of joy regardless of the fact that she's almost 80.
Yeah.
It's like, that's such a gift. So again, appreciating people's presence and then understanding your presence gives them the gift. That's what it's all about. So that'd be one of the biggest takeaways.
Yeah, it's to appreciate people.
Yeah, and
find appreciation.
Appreciate people, find appreciation. I think that it's so important that you just let people be themselves. And if they're being themselves and it bothers you, you remove yourself from the situation. Like, if there's something that someone's saying to someone else,
it's not your responsibility to fix them.
Oh, and it's not your responsibility. If you feel uncomfortable with the conversation that someone's having,
leave.
Just leave. And if that person feels uncomfortable, they'll change the subject.
Yeah.
So that's another piece. But I think it's just being able to take interest in what people have to say, what they have to think about, what their views are, just being interested in them and getting to know them versus the surface level, like, oh, hey, how's work? Is really taking an interest in them. The more of an interest you take in the people that are around you, the more interested they'll be in you, and that's where you really get to share vulnerably, and that's how you build relationships.
Yeah, there's so many little moments like that. I love those moments. One of the things that I was really intentional about was setting myself up to be able to be present, and that meant waking up, doing yoga, or going for a walk, or doing a quick prayer, and then checking my phone, like just putting it somewhere else. So I think one of the kind of multi-layered lessons that I would give to people too who want to build relationships or would love to be able to just be totally present and not in their head. You don't just get there, especially if you are a very driven, intense person, or you're a high achiever, or you have a business. Like, it's okay that you have so much going on in your head, but be intentional when you do have those moments to make memories and to be present. Don't just expect that you're just going to wake up and magically feel full of love, because it might sound like we're that way, but at least for me personally, like, I am not. I easily slip into, oh, well, I got to do this. Okay, I should definitely go talk to that person. Like, just starting to get in my head about what the right way to do it, quote unquote, right way to do it is. So when we were at that weekend, every time I woke up, I was woken up by our dog early, but instead of complaining about it and being like, oh, I'm going to take this vacation, I should sleep, I should do this, blah, blah. I was like, I'm going to get up. I'm going to enjoy this quiet time, set myself up so that by the time everybody else wakes up, I am full of love. I am beaming with light. People want to come, like Brian's grandmother, I want her to want to come sit with me because she feels that I'm not in my book or like in my own little world. Like, I want people to sense that I am open and here for you and I want to connect with you. So being able to just do that for yourself is so important. And while we're talking about this area of healthy relationships, it starts with a healthy relationship with yourself. It really does.
Yeah, well, we had such an intense week the prior week. We
Oh my
did
gosh.
a scholarship. We had 170 people apply for the scholarships. It was a really focused week. Once everything was cleared off my schedule, I took 15 minutes to do a priming exercise before we left. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's my checkout. That's my check-in. I'm in vacation mode. So it's so important to have an anchor, right? Have an anchor, and then just being able to learn how to tap in and tap out. Yep. Like there was times I would check Slack, tap in, tap out, tap in, tap out, but not check. I'm not scrolling, right? Mm-hmm. I'm here for the conversation. Mm-hmm. I think that the last piece I would give people
I have one last piece too.
You're more than welcome to share. I think that it's so fun to ask great questions of people that you love.
True that.
I asked my grandmother, because you had asked my grandmother what was her earliest memory, something like that.
Did.
And she told me, but my grandmother's like, I've spent so much time listening to everyone. No one really listens to me. So I just started asking her questions like, oh, when did you decide you want to be a nurse? And she's like, oh, well, this is my whole story of my life. This is when I decided. My grandmother then, she was like, oh, Lindsay asked me first memories about my life. And I said, well, what's your first memory about my grandfather? Like, and da-da-da. So she told me all these different stories that they had. And you're just listening to the story of someone's life. Mm-hmm. And obviously, you got to find a way to ask them questions in a way that they want to answer. And some people might not go as deep with you. But it's just staying curious. Mm-hmm. It's just staying curious about what people are interested in.
Yes, the art of inquisition.
Yeah, and that's how you really get to have, I think, a fulfilling relationship. Yep. The reason why we don't want to have relationships is because we don't want to stay at the surface. There's nothing fun about hearing about how work is or how you're going to repair your house or
all your health problems lately. And
yeah, no, it's like, oh, what did you do when you were a kid that was fun? Yeah. Like, what were some of the fun things you used to do? Mm-hmm. Did you used to do this? It's just talking, sitting and having a great conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you do that for people you care about, you're going to learn a lot.
Yep, I would agree with that. And what I would end with, so we volunteered at a kids camp for foster kids called Royal Family Kids Camp, and we did this for a week. One of their main slogan for this camp and the main principle that runs under everything that they do is make moments matter. Make moments matter, because in this camp setting, you can't scoop up these kids and save them. You can't change their whole life in a week. All you can really do is focus on making every moment count. And that's really where our life changes trajectory, is in a moment, in a decision, in a conversation, in an aha. What I did this weekend that I would tie this all down with is I took that slogan and that motto to heart, and it really does pay off to just focus on the value of a moment, because you don't have to fill every moment with words and conversation. Like you said about Uncle Fred, just listening to the song. It's like a hug, as cheesy as it sounds, really can fill up someone's soul if you just actually mentally and emotionally pour yourself into that moment. Like your dad, I gave your dad a hug, and I said, he sang a song he really didn't want to because his voice isn't where he wants it to be, or his hands aren't it doesn't have the dexterity he used to have. And I gave him a big hug, and I was like, thank you for singing. I loved hearing you. And just like really gave him a good hug. And he, instead of saying, oh, I wasn't that good, or like, oh, it wasn't what I wanted to be, like I could tell that he actually received the compliment and the gratitude more than the compliment. And he's like, you're welcome. And it was simple, but it was just a moment. And it's like there's those little moments, and I had plenty of those, like with my mom or my dad or your grandparents or aunt and uncle. But it's just like the moments are so valuable, because your memories are not movies. Your memories are not a script of 30 minutes of dialogue. You only remember a moment. Mm-hmm. So allow that to be valuable enough for you to be present. And that's really what this all comes back to, is quality relationships come when you're present, when you're curious, you master that art of inquisition, and you have a healthy relationship with yourself first. so that you can build those relationships.
Mm-hmm. So key. I thought of a bunch of funny moments there.
So many.
I won't share more of them with you, but our encouragement from this podcast is that there is something that you might be able to take away or that you might be able to resonate with. So let us know in the comment section if you're on YouTube what your big takeaway is, what you loved about this. Were there any things that really stood out to you, or even just some moments that you would love to share that might be similar to what we did? Or if you're on Apple, screenshot this, shout us out on Instagram, and let us know your big takeaway for the podcast. But we appreciate you. We hope this is helpful. We hope this inspires you to maybe test your own comfort zone with something like this. And if not, maybe it helps you heal a relationship that you know you need to get into and rebuild. On that note, my name is Brian Pickowitz.
And I'm Lindsay Pickowitz.
Now go out and conquer your day.
Cheers.
Cheers.